Thanks so much. Great to be back here with the PBA. Thanks to Kaz for having us and everybody else. We're also joined by Mark Wilson, CEO of Florida Chamber, Reggie Cooper, General Manager at Amrit Ocean Resort and Residences, and then the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, Siobhan Harris. And we're here to have a roundtable because people will ask me, this has been true ever since I've been doing this, before that, what about these amendments? What do they mean? Like, I don't understand, kind of that, and that's by design. They're not on purpose. And so we're here to talk about Amendment 3, what it is, what the implications would be for Florida. And the way I like to tell people is when you're on an amendment to the Constitution on your ballot, that is different than a policy that may be proposed at a city commission, county commission, or the state legislature. Pass statutes, we got some of our legislators, they can pass statutes. Maybe there's a problem with one. You know what? The people talk to the legislature, and they go back, they can change, just like that's how the system envisioned it. When you start talking about amending the Constitution, if it doesn't work, that cannot be changed by legislation. You cannot do that. It is permanent. The chance of actually changing it through another constitutional amendment is functionally zero. Theoretically possible, but the chance that that would happen is almost certainly zero. So your mindset on this should be the default position on these proposed amendments is no. The people have a high burden to prove to you why you should make this permanent change to Florida. And what it does is it takes the issue away from future generations of Floridians to decide through the normal political process. You could have landslide elections to enact policy different to one of the amendments, and you're handcuffed. You can't do it. So sometimes people say these amendments are, democracy. In reality is when you put something in the Constitution, you're actually removing it from political discussion and debate in terms of the constitutional system that we have. And so the default should be no. They should prove to you beyond any shadow of a doubt why this is something that would be good to put in Florida's Constitution. And that's even a different question whether you agree with the policy, because there are certain things that policies you may like that don't belong in a Constitution. So the default should be no. And if they don't prove it to you, because I have people tell me, oh, I see this ad, that ad, for, against, what am I supposed to do? Well, look, if that's your position, you vote no. If you don't know what to do, you vote no. If you're not totally crystal clear that that amendment should pass, and that's true for 3 or 4, or really any of them, but those 3 have gotten the most those 2 have gotten the most attention, the default is that you vote no. Now, it's also interesting to ask, how did this Amendment 3, how did it get here? How did it get on your ballot? These things that just kind of, come down from the skies, they grow on the trees. How does this actually get on the ballot? And the stories on different amendments are different. This amendment got on the ballot because of one mega marijuana company. This was written, Amendment 3, by the CEO of the company. They have now poured in $141.9 million to pass Amendment 3. Now, this is a corporation that's traded publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And so that's important because as a publicly traded corporation, you could not spend $141.9 million of corporate funds on an amendment unless you stood to benefit an awful lot from that. In other words, they can't write an amendment that's good for Florida, that's good for other people. It's got to be beneficial to their company because their goal, they have a fiduciary obligation to maximize profits and maximize shareholder value. And there's nothing wrong, that's how it should be, but just understand that duty, when they're writing an amendment and then funding it with $141.9 million, if they're writing an amendment and there's what would be better for Florida or what would be better for them, they are an obligation to side with what would be better for them. And you see that reflected in this document. So that's how it got here. This was not, you had a bunch of people that got around the coffee table in some place in Florida and decided they wanted to write an amendment. This is written by one mega marijuana corporation to benefit that corporation. Now, what does it do? And you see the genesis of the amendment is very much reflected in the decisions, the choices that were made when you read this. And I would just also tell, the actual text of the Constitution they're proposing to amend is not on your ballot. There's a ballot summary that voters see, but that is not the text of the amendment. In order to get the text of the amendment, you got to go online to the Secretary of State's website, click on it, and you get it. And anything that's underlined is the proposed changes. Anything that's normal is the existing Constitution, so they're amending on top of sections that are currently in the state Constitution. So the summary was also written by the CEO of the company, does not tell you everything that's in this amendment. So if you only read the summary, you are not educating yourself fully on what is in this amendment. And I would just say, if you're going to vote for it, you should actually take the time to read the text before you do. And if you haven't read the text, the default should just be no, don't vote for it. So the summary is what you see. I'm going to be talking about what's actually in the amendment, because the summary is poll-tested fluff to try to convince as many people, oh, sounds good, check the box. It's not the way you should approach a constitutional amendment. So here's what it does. And sometimes people say to me, we're the free state of Florida. All these people were locked out of schools and businesses, forced to wear masks. We were down here having a good time. People could make their own decisions. Even if you don't like marijuana, why not just let the floodgates open? Let's side with freedom. And it's sometimes been portrayed as about freedom. And I can tell you, this amendment is not about freedom. And you want to know why? Well, and it is true. They talk about. Before I get in that, just set the stage, they're saying there should be a safe and regulated market for legal marijuana. Understand, we have that in Florida now, okay? We have a program that the voters pass, medical marijuana, people can get cards. We have almost 1 million Floridians that have these marijuana cards. Do you think all of them have debilitating illnesses? No, no, no. Nobody believes that, right? And so you have legal marijuana in Florida. We just don't have it overrunning every town square and every public place like Colorado and some of these other places. So you already have that. So that's already there. And then you also have the issue of, they'll sometimes say, well, you shouldn't have people, rotting in prison just for smoking a joint or something. And I agree with that. So I asked the Department of Corrections, how many people are in Florida state prisons, any of our properties, for either using or possessing personal amounts of marijuana? The answer to that is 0. Not a single person is. So that is not what's happening in Florida. And so, because I've had some people say, well, I don't like marijuana, but if people want to do it, I don't think it's a good use of tax dollars to have people, rotting in our state prisons. Well, I agree with you, and there is nobody rotting in our state prisons, so don't even worry about that. And I've actually pardoned people for past marijuana offenses since I've been governor. So that's just kind of, we have a safe and legal market already. We have the medical program. People do use it. It is used in ways that maybe were not originally advertised, but it is what it is, right? And I implemented this when I became governor because the voters passed it. So what is this? So it's not about freedom, because what they say, now they do say you will have a constitutional right to possess and smoke up to 3 ounces of marijuana, which is 100 joints. That's a lot more than California. That's a lot more than Colorado, just so we're clear on that. So constitutional right to possess and smoke pretty large amounts of marijuana, but only if you buy it from them. They do not give you the right to grow your own marijuana on your property. And you have to ask yourself, why would they not have done that? Because it would mean less money for them. That's why they didn't put it in there. The excuse they give is, oh, it would have violated the single subject rule. They put cultivate for them. I see cultivate in here. They just didn't put cultivate for you. So that was a political choice that they made that will result in them making more money than if they would have truly said you should have the freedom to grow your own. So that's not freedom to say you can't grow it on your own property, that you can use it, but only if you buy it from this select marijuana cartel, which they're creating and putting in the Constitution. It also isn't about freedom because as a Floridian, you should have the freedom to not be involved with marijuana if it's something you don't like. I think a lot of people are like, people are doing it in their own home, like we don't really care about that. But you should be able to be on the beaches, you should be able to walk down the street, you should be able to be in public places without having this permeate everywhere, like it does in Denver, like it does in Manhattan, San Francisco, and all these other places. There is nothing in this amendment that restricts the use of marijuana in public. There is nothing in this amendment that empowers the legislature to limit or restrict the use of marijuana in public. And in fact, the fact that they say it's a constitutional right, that's much different. It's one thing to say it's decriminalized and then it can be regulated, just like you don't have a constitutional right to drink beer, but they can regulate public consumption, open containers, all that stuff, to try to bring some sense to it. This is much different. This is not just saying you're decriminalizing. This is an affirmative constitutional right. That has huge implications, but certainly has implications for being able to have any type of public limitation. And so the people that matter in the legislature have all looked at this, said, we're not going to have the authority to rein this in. And some people say, oh, the legislature will fix it. Well, first of all, why are you proposing an amendment to the Constitution that needs the legislature to fix it? Why aren't you just getting it right the first time? Why didn't you just make clear in here that people have no right to use this in public? Why didn't you limit it to private spaces and residences? They could have done that. They didn't do that. And so this opens a massive can of worms. It will impact the quality of life in the state of Florida. And I'm sympathetic when people tell me, I don't really care if people are using this on their own time, or in their home, kind of like live and let live. But here's the thing, but I would never do it, is what people will say. And most Floridians don't do it. They don't have an interest in it. But here's what I'd say. The way this is written, you may not have an interest in marijuana, but marijuana will have an interest in you. This will impact your life. There's no question about it, the way it's written. So nothing in here at all, zero, if you read it, has any authority to limit public use. And in fact, they're making it an affirmative constitutional right. So just think about that. You're on the sidewalk in front of some restaurant and someone says, hey, you can't do that. They're going to say, I have a constitutional right to do this. This is crazy the way they wrote it. Even if you're pro-marijuana, you would not do it this way. This is going to create huge amounts of problems. So it's not about freedom because they're channeling commercial transactions to themselves, not letting you grow your own, but then exposing the public to rampant public use, which will not be able to be reined in. And here's the thing. It's also interesting. Even if they had put that in here, Colorado has pretty strong prohibitions against public use. San Francisco, New York City, they don't just let you do it like in the law, but that's what ends up happening anyways. So I don't think you would see it be done effectively, even if they had that in here, which they don't. So that's the thing. So it's not a freedom issue at all. And here's how you know. Here's why they're spending $141.9 million, channeling your transactions there, not grow your own. But then they do this, which is really egregious. And I don't think the most ardent marijuana enthusiasts in Florida, if they had to write an amendment or write a piece of legislation, they would never have put this in here. They give themselves total immunity from civil liability. Again, you wouldn't know this from the ballot summary. You got to read the text of the amendment. And what it says is these chosen companies, when they're acting in accordance with the section as it relates to acquiring, cultivating, processing, manufacturing, selling, and distributing marijuana products and marijuana accessories to adults for personal use, shall not be subject to criminal or civil liability or sanctions under Florida law. Did you see any exceptions to that language? That is blanket immunity. This matters. How you write this matters. This is in the Constitution. If they sell you defective marijuana and then you get harmed and you sue them, you can't. It will be dismissed. And then if you complain about it to your legislator, they can't change this once it's in the Constitution. So this is a type of immunity that would make Big Pharma blush. I don't even think they've had the chutzpah to try anything like this. This is massive blanket immunity. Does anybody think that that's good? And it's at all aspects of the process. So yes, if they sell you something bad, you can't sue, but distributing. So if they're distributing it to a dispensary, they run you over, can you then sue one of their trucks? Doesn't say that here. And it's interesting because this is being added to our current stuff on medical marijuana. Medical marijuana, the people that wrote that knew that liability was an issue. So they made clear when they did medical marijuana that physicians were still liable for malpractice and negligence and that's actually, so you will actually have an ability to sue for medical marijuana malpractice and that, but not for recreational marijuana. How the hell does that make any sense? It's just absurd. So this is a really brazen provision to have in here. I think this is trying to shield them from lawsuits. The way they've written the other provisions is going to generate a lot of lawsuits against individuals and businesses who are not a part of the chosen cartel. But this is just reckless. And again, not on your ballot summary. You got to actually go down and read it if you want to see it. So I have not heard anyone offer a justification why this would be appropriate to have in the Florida Constitution, because it's not appropriate to have that. And again, if this were actually done by citizens and from Florida who were really concerned and wanted to write something to do, I don't think the Constitution's the appropriate vehicle. I think you'd work with your legislators, elect new people that can do this legislatively, but nobody would have put this in here except for the companies that stand to benefit from it. Really inappropriate use of a state constitution to let them hijack it to give themselves basically immunity, where they're going to be able to do, act with impunity in ways that are not appropriate for the state of Florida. The other thing that you hear is this will lead to a massive amount of money for education and for law enforcement. Where have we heard that before? I remember the lotto, they said we'd have all this money. So there is nothing in this amendment, read it, nothing that has any money for education or law enforcement. That is totally fabricated. There is nothing in here that would do that. Read it, read the underlined sections, it's not there. Now you have the potential to have it be taxable, and it's not clear to me the legislature would tax it, but here's the problem. When you tax it, you raise the price. And what has happened in Colorado and in California, the black market has expanded dramatically. So you have not eliminated the black market, which they're trying to say on some of these advertisements. It's been just the opposite. And it makes sense, because if people are using it in public, there's going to be more use, more demand. If the price goes up because of being regulated and taxed, the black market will be able to undercut that, and they'll be able to capture a lot of market share. So Colorado's black market, much bigger than it was prior to them doing it. California's much bigger. And it's actually created huge issues for law enforcement that they didn't have prior to that happening. So there is not money in here for education. And Colorado, I do think, made some money to start. Now they don't make money off of it. And you also have to ask in Florida, even if it was taxed, even if you made some in the short term, I don't think you'd make any in the medium term, but even if you did in the short term, what are you losing on tourism? What are you losing for restaurant? What are you losing for other things? Because this is now a part of Florida in ways that may be off-putting to a lot of tourists, may be off-putting to a lot of families. And so I think you would see revenue that we derive from tourism go down, and I think some other business revenue would go down as well. So it would definitely be, in my judgment, a net loss for the state of Florida in terms of the revenue. Again, if you do a static analysis, you can make an argument, hey, they're going to tax it, and then by definition they're going to, but we all know, we know economics, we know people change behavior, we know that there are second and third order effects for all this. And here's the thing about Florida. Since I've been governor, if you look at all the state debt from the 1840s to the present, we've paid off 36% of it. We have the lowest state debt of all 50 states in this country. We've tripled the rainy day fund since I've been governor. We've have massive budget surpluses. We don't need weed money in Florida. We really don't. We have the ability to fund. We have funded teacher salary increases every year for the past 4 years. We have funded law enforcement. These guys have money. They can give bonuses. They do all this stuff. We have stepped up and done. We've done environmental restoration like never before, Everglades and all these other things, really, really important. We've done massive infusion for transportation and roads and all the things that we need to keep the state moving like never before. So we have probably the best fiscal situation anywhere in the country. So it doesn't provide tax money for any of those things, but honestly, we're in great shape, and this is not the way you'd want to build your economy. You want to build it the way we've been doing it in Florida in ways that have been really, really positive. So that's that. The other thing is highway safety. This is just a fact. In Colorado, you've had a big increase in vehicle accidents for people driving while high. That's just a fact. And that's real lives that have been at stake. We obviously, I mean, it's challenging enough on the roads in South Florida under the best of circumstances. And we do have people will get behind the wheel of the car after drinking too much alcohol, and that's wrong. The difference, though, is that if they're swerving around and they get pulled over, do a breathalyzer, do a sobriety test, and you can hold them accountable. It's very hard to prove somebody is high on marijuana in a way that would effectively deter it. And so you basically end up in a situation where a lot of times they get away with it until there's something really, really serious that happens. So Colorado's seen a big increase in that. I think California as well, but certainly Colorado. And the insurance premiums for cars have gone up dramatically. And car insurance around the country, apart from the marijuana issue, has gone up a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's been one of the #1 things that have gone up in terms of the inflation spiral we've been having to deal with. This would add on top of that in Florida. And I think we also, you know, we have some issues on the roads in Florida. It's just it's just an interesting mix of people that are driving in Florida, and there's different reasons for that. But the reality is this would make that worse. That is, I don't think there's any question about that. The other thing is look, I'm a dad. I got a second grader, first grader, and a preschooler. And I look at how will this impact kids. Now, it is not authorizing giving kids marijuana. You got to be 21 years of age or older under this. As it, you know, obviously you shouldn't do minors. But what's happened in these other states who also have the same age limit is these things get packaged as candy and gummies, and they get put in packaging that you think it's like Sour Patch Kids, and it turns out it's marijuana gummies. And this stuff's very potent. And this ends up in the hands of very young people. And so that will happen in Florida. There's really no way around that when these things are flooding the market. You'd obviously try the best you can to stop it. I'm not sure what this liability shield would mean for enforcing that, but the reality is expect that to happen. And so there was an advertisement put out with a ER doctor from California, and she just basically said what's happened since California has gone down this road. She's very young kids coming in with major issues, having eaten some of these gummies or some of the candy or whatever, and they've got serious problems. And they're way too young to have bought it legally, but they are legal products that were in a store at some point. So that will happen. And I would just say, if you have kids, but even if you don't, I think people that don't have kids, are elderly, that may be grandparents, they care about the next generation. We want our kids to do well in Florida. Is there any argument that you can make to say passing Amendment 3 will be positive for kids in the state of Florida? I don't think you can. I think clearly it would cause problems. We can argue about the extent of those problems, but I don't see any way that this would be something that would be good for youth when you see what's happened in Colorado, California, and some of these places, the way it's packaged, the way it's attractive to minors, and that's just not something that we need. Just as a parent, I mean, it's hard enough as a parent nowadays to do all this stuff. They're in social media, this, that, you name it. It's really, really difficult, and so this would add something else because this would be more available. And I know kids in middle school, high school, I'm not saying none of them ever access marijuana as it exists now. I get it. I understand that. But I think we'd have to be honest with ourselves that you will see a flood of product in that will trickle out onto the streets in ways that are going to be very attractive to kids. And I don't think we want to see that at all. So, my message is go into this eyes wide open. Understand how it got on your ballot. Understand who's behind it. Understand who would benefit from it. And also just keep in mind you're amending the Constitution. There is no urgency to do anything with our Constitution. If you're not convinced this is a really, really good thing for the state of Florida, then you just vote no. You're not going to be able to unring this bell. Once it's in the Constitution, you're playing for keeps. It's done. And any of the problems that come, if even a fraction of the problems happen in Florida that have happened in Colorado, we're going to rue the day that we did that. And I'm just struck, and I know Mark talks to people in other states, and I'm sure Kaz and others do. I have not seen any outcry of people from Colorado, California, places that have gone down this road that say, man, you should do what we did. It's worked out really well. Nobody says that. What they say is, don't do what we did. We regret doing it. There's a lot of people in Colorado that supported the initial marijuana legislation who now look back and say it was a mistake that they did it. And so we're not going to be able to reverse course if it ends up being a mistake. And so unless you're sure, you just vote no and then you move on. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to actually study and do this. And look, this is, the founding fathers did not want to do business this way, where you just throw something on the ballot. Because, you think about it, every single provision here, you got to unpack. And so these legislators, if something like that was before them, it's not that they're any better than anyone else. They have a staff. They research. That's their job to actually do all this, to represent you. If you're somebody that's raising kids, you're working, you're doing all this, what you're supposed to do, all this like high scale research and try to figure out what all this stuff means and everything, like it's tough. It's not easy to do. And I think the education is key. They just want you to read that summary and think that this is going to be great, when in reality, there's a lot in this amendment that they're not telling you about. So go into it eyes wide open. You're not going to get, if it passes, you'll never get another chance to do it differently. And you always have the right, as a citizen of this republic, to go to your legislators, to support candidates that are going to make changes that you want. If this is an issue that you're concerned about, pressure them into doing something that you want to see. But I guarantee you, no one would write this Amendment 3. Nobody would do that if given the chance. Okay, we're going to throw it over. All right, since you're hosting us, Kaz, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start, Governor. Thank you. For those that don't know me, John Kazanjian. I go by Kaz. I'm the president of the Palm Beach and Martin County Police Benevolent Association, also the president of the Florida Police Benevolent Association. Governor, thank you for letting me speak, because usually when I'm speaking, I usually go after some politicians and try and get better benefits and salary for my members. So this is a little different, but I have the background to speak on this. So a little about me. I got 38 years in law enforcement over at PBSL, Palm Beach County. 10 years of that was in narcotics, and 18 years in SWAT. So 99% of the warrants that we did was whether it was cocaine, marijuana, meth, or heroin. You know what? It came out the same. I saw families destroyed, whether it was marijuana or cocaine. So that's why we have to move forward and defeat this bill. But I just recently went up to Boston, and Massachusetts. It's legal up there. And we were doing my daughter's golf tournament, and I'll get into that in a minute. But people, it reeked of marijuana. Wherever you went, you just smelled marijuana. And wherever you went into a nightclub or a restaurant, you saw waitresses and bartenders, glassy-eyed. Listen, I can tell when someone's smoking and they're high. And they're high. They're walking around like zombies there. 6 months ago, I was in Vegas. Oh, that's Boston on steroids in Vegas, I'll tell you around. You go down the strip, that's all you smell is weed. So, with that being said, going up to Boston with my daughter, she died in a car crash a few years back, and that was because of a driver that was, what am I looking for?
Aye.
Wasn't high, he was distracted, thank you very much, a distracted driver. And you know what, if you're gonna be high, you're gonna be distracted. And I'm telling you, and the governor touched this a little bit on on what's gonna happen with law enforcement. Trying to enforce this, it's gonna be impossible. I got some DUI people in the audience here, and we've been going over this. The problem with THC, it stays in your system for a long time. So when it stays in your system for a long time, you can't really get a true reading on the nanograms of how much THC is in there. So if it's over 30 days or whatever, it's 30 days or under, you're going to get the same amount. You know, it'll gradually go away, but you don't know. So when you go and you arrest them, you're going to get the arrest. However, when you go to trial, you're not going to have the defense attorneys that are going to come out and say, well, he wasn't high this day. And you can get all the roadsides or whatever, but they're going to get off. I don't know of anybody that's gotten convicted yet in Palm Beach anyways of just pulling them over and getting arrested being high on marijuana. So that's going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem for law enforcement. Our hands are going to be tied. So we can't have this bill. We got to vote against it. Governor, I hope we can defeat it because, like you said, our hands are going to be tied. And just, you brought up Colorado, and I got a couple of stats on Colorado. Colorado roadway, since recreational marijuana was legalized, traffic deaths where drivers tested positive for marijuana increased 138%. So that's Colorado. We didn't even pull all these other states. We just did Colorado. And all Colorado traffic deaths increased by 29%. And traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana more than doubled in 2020. Unlike alcohol, and I touched on this, where there's a 0.08 threshold for alcohol to be impaired, non-invasive breath testing, that's another thing. We don't have a breath test. We can't test. So the only thing, we have to do an invasive test where we have to get urine or blood. And we know that's, in law enforcement, that's the last resort. So I don't know how we're going to do this. I think the legislature, you're going to have to come up with some good legislation to help us out. Because I don't know if there's any breath tests out there that's going to help us out. So listen, I think they're putting the cart before the horse, Governor. And they really haven't thought this thing out. It's going to be a nightmare for law enforcement.
No. They thought it out. They just didn't think, they didn't care about the concerns you're raising. They thought it out about how it would make them money. But I think it's also important to point out, because there's to be some advertisements like some sheriff, hey, this is great, with all this. The PBA, Police Benevolent Association in Florida, endorsed a no vote on Amendment 3. The Fraternal Order of Police endorsed a no vote on Amendment 3. The Florida Sheriff's Association endorsed a no vote on Amendment 3, and I know they put a couple sheriffs up, but we have 66 sheriffs in Florida, and I would say at least 60 of them have publicly come out for a no vote on Amendment 3. And you'll sometimes hear this argument that, well, we want law enforcement to focus on keeping the community safe and things that matter. They shouldn't be bogged down in worrying about whether someone's smoking marijuana. I've asked every single police chief and sheriff, are you bogged down worrying about someone smoking marijuana like in their backyard? No, they're not putting any resources into that. And it's offensive to suggest that Florida law enforcement somehow doesn't have their eye on the ball. They do. They're focusing on the things that matter. That's why we have a 50-year low in the crime rate. That's why people want to move to Florida and move away from the high crime areas. So they're working really hard. They are not bogged down at all with marijuana. That's why no one is in jail for marijuana, or in prison in Florida for marijuana use. But if this passes, it's going to open up a whole new can of worms for them. So they will actually be distracted from doing stuff if it passes. They are currently not right now, and you see that in just the figures. And so I think that's really, really clear. But I appreciate what our law enforcement have done to just speak out about the truth about what this would do, and to think about very seriously the implications it has for public safety. Okay, Reggie Cooper, you're up.
Great, thank you, Governor. Reggie Cooper, I'm the general manager of Omrid Ocean Resort on Singer Island, and we're a wellness resort, so obviously a non-smoking resort for our guests and patrons. I'm also vice chair and a board member for the Florida Lodging Restaurant Association Palm Beach chapter. And as our group meets with different hoteliers and restaurant operators, you know, the implications of not being able to enforce or having to tell people what the difference is between their constitutional right and what a public space is, what a non-public space is, how that will infringe upon the environment that we work so hard to create within these hospitality entities, that the aroma that a few people can make to really negatively impact a great number of people is something that has a lot of concern for us. The inability to differentiate between whether it's not allowed to smoke tobacco or not allowed to smoke tobacco and marijuana is very problematic for us in terms of how we will approach people. I can envision customers, you know, smoking in a lobby of a hotel and saying, I am constitutionally allowed to do this, which for our industry will cause a lot of disruption and a lot of difficulty in our ability to look after those matters. So as we see this without the abilities to really think through what the enforcement and how we'll handle things the way we're able to with smoking in public spaces for tobacco, this causes us a lot of concern in terms of how we're going to have to deal with this if this is something that does get passed.
Well, thank you. And you know, you'll when you talk about things being a constitutional right, which is unprecedented that this would be considered, it just limits what people can do. And it has big implications for businesses. I mean, certainly from a tourism perspective, I have not seen one argument presented that this would be good for Florida tourism at all. In fact, I think people are concerned, especially given how broad this is. But you also have implications for the workplace. And who can be hired and fired. I mean, you'd think like people want to have a drug-free workplace. They should be able to do that as a private business. But the problem is like when it's a constitutional right, it creates huge issues, litigation, endless litigation, and maybe even ultimately being resolved against businesses in terms of how they're managing their workforce and some of these things. And it's like, you know, there's certain things that are constitutional rights, like your freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the like. Commodities and products, you know, are not, consumer products are just not considered constitutional rights in the United States. That's never been how it's done. You can regulate, not regulate, tax, not tax, you know, prescribe, not prescribe. I mean, there are places in the U.S., not Florida, but there are places that have dry counties where they don't sell alcohol. That's a choice that they've made. And so people go to the next county or what have you. But this really does change the equation. And I do not think it's as simple as saying, oh, no, our policy at this resort is going to be, you know, no smoking of marijuana, and then that just happens. That is not going to work the way this is written. And I'd also just point out, some people say, yeah, I don't want to see, you know, the marijuana smoke in restaurants and stuff, but Florida has an indoor smoking ban, so we don't have to worry about that. The indoor smoking ban applies to tobacco smoke. It does not apply to marijuana smoke. So just so we're clear, that particular provision in Florida would not cover smoking of marijuana indoors. Okay, Siobhan Harris, DCF.
Thank you, Governor. So first, I love living in the state of Florida. And in part, it's because I know that our elected officials are working overtime to make this one of the greatest states in the nation, and the governor is at the helm. He is at the front of the pack in terms of that. And his advocacy, your advocacy on this is a true testament, and so I want to thank you for that. You know, when I think about this amendment, I'm going to come at it from two vantage points. First, as the Secretary of a department who works tirelessly to combat the use of any substance, any illicit drug in all forms, it's very concerning. We literally are spending hundreds of millions of dollars every single year to combat substance use in our state. Why would we want to normalize that even further by legalizing marijuana in our state? I foresee that we will have to spend even more money to continue to educate the public on the dangers of THC. So I'm gravely worried about it because marijuana is addictive, and we shouldn't be deceived into thinking that it isn't. 1 in 6 teens will become addicted if using marijuana. 1 in 10 adults. I know a lot of the proponents say this isn't about youth. Well, let's talk about adults. 1 in 10 adults will become addicted. And 100% of the time, it affects your cognitive functioning, it impairs good judgment, and places serious risk to public safety. Again, why would we want that for our great state? Some are going to say, well, if you have a medical license, you can use it now. Presumably, you're using it under the direction and guidance of a physician. We will not have that if it's legalized for recreational use. I'm worried that even though some say it's not a gateway drug, we have seen countless stories of individuals share that on their trajectory of substance use, this was the entry point. Again, why would we want that for our state? And the more you use it, the higher the likelihood that you will become addicted. Up to 50% of individuals who use it daily become addicted. The governor mentioned the worries of our youth. This I'm coming at from a mom of 2 girls. I don't want to be in public spaces with my kids having to smell it, having to explain it. It stinks. I don't want to have those kinds of conversations on a daily basis. I want to enjoy the benefits that we have in this beautiful state without it being ruined by this amendment. In our youth, you see that more than half of the teens receiving addiction treatment are doing so because of marijuana addiction. Again, with the proliferation that you see in states that have made it legal in terms of what you see on the black market, why do we not think that will affect our youth? Why do we think young kids will not be impacted? I just read a story on Saturday around a bunch of kids having to be rushed to the hospital because the edibles got mixed in with their Halloween candy. We don't want that for our state. I put a lot of faith and trust in our legislature. I feel like if this is something that we want to consider as a state, it should be done through the proper channels, debated within the 4 corners of our Capitol with our elected officials that we put our faith and trust in. That is the way that we should go about this. This is not the right public policy for Florida, and it's not the right policy for our communities.
Great, thank you. Okay, Florida Chamber of Commerce President Mark Wilson.
All right, Governor, thank you very much. Thanks to the panel as well. So this, to the Florida Chamber and the business community in Florida has been opposing Amendment 3 for a long time. This is the ultimate you can't judge a book by its cover amendment. I would tell you about a year ago, a lot of people said, what's the harm? It's just people smoking at home, what's the big deal? But what Floridians are beginning to realize is what the governor's laid out today. When you actually read what's in the book, when you read the details, now what's happening is Amendment 3 is losing support, and it's losing support quickly because people are actually starting to look at what's in the amendment. So I also, Governor, for you and the First Lady, on behalf of the entire business community, well, except maybe one company that we talked about, on behalf of the entire business community, I want to thank you because what we're really talking about here is protecting our Constitution from... We're talking about protecting our Constitution from out-of-state and special interest groups, and this is just a really bad idea. I wrote an article recently called "Don't California My Florida," and it's all about we can't take these bad ideas from other states. So people ask, you've heard about why this is bad for law enforcement and why this is bad for families and why this is bad for communities. Just a word about why the business community in Florida is so against this. Let me start with other states, right? I'm a state chamber president. I talked to Colorado, I talked to the Arizona Chamber this morning, talked to New York, talked to Ohio. Every single one of these state chambers across the country, the governor's right, has said, stop it while you can. Not one state chamber in the country has said, this is a good idea, this is something you should do. They've all said, stop it while you can. Just perspective for everybody, if Florida was a country, we would be the 15th largest economy on the planet. And our economy's grown over 30% since Governor DeSantis took office. And he's right about the debt. We have the lowest debt per capita of any state in the country. We also, sorry, Governor. We also are creating about 1 out of every 10 or 11 new jobs in the United States, month after month after month. Why in the world would we take this terrible idea and give ourselves a headwind against this kind of economic growth that we have? So here's the deal. 2 million companies in Florida, about 10 million people in Florida work. The rest of the country wants to be like Florida. When you have no place, time, and manner restrictions, right? And as the governor said, when the only people in Florida who benefit from Amendment 3 are the people who grow drugs and sell drugs, and the lawyers on the billboards. And here's the reason, right? The companies who are going to grow and sell the drugs have said, you can't sue us if somebody dies or gets injured from this. Well, who the heck do you think they're going to sue? The people on the billboards are going to look to the local businesses all over Florida, and they're going to say, now I'm going to sue you. That's the last thing we need in Florida. So again, this is a horrible idea for families. It's a horrible idea for law enforcement. This will help none of our 405 cities or 67 counties, and the business community in Florida stands against this. We've got local chambers all over Florida, from Citrus County to Lakeland to the Daytona Chamber, who've looked at this and said, this is a bad idea, we can't have this. So on behalf of businesses all over Florida, let's do the right thing and vote no on Amendment 3. Thank you.
And again, reading the text is important because this really opens up the way this is written by saying it's a constitutional right. But even with that, there's ways you can frame constitutional protections. So for example, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the freedom of speech, establishment, religion, so on and so forth. And so that has been interpreted. Eventually it was applied where any state government entity would also, even though it says Congress, they applied it through the 14th Amendment. But what they've said is that there's a requirement of state action. So if you are in your friend's living room and you're, I don't know, waxing poetic about some political issue and your friend doesn't like it, it's his house, he can kick you out. Doesn't implement the First Amendment. This does not say that the legislature shall make no, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't apply to private conduct. We don't know, this would be litigated, right? There are constitutional provisions that do apply to private conduct, that it doesn't necessarily require government action. And when you say no civil liability for personal use, to me that's saying that that right applies not just against something government may pass, but if you're in a hotel or you're in a restaurant, that you would potentially have enforceable rights even against those private entities. It certainly would get litigated. And so it's just very, it's not surprising given the money behind it, but you can't sue them for anything they do. But if someone's in a restaurant and they're doing it and the restaurant wants them out because it's bugging the customers, they may not even be able to get rid of them depending on how it's interpreted. At a minimum, they're going to be a lawsuit. So they're going to have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And even if they win, that's a huge cost. And that'll happen all these workplaces. Can you bring marijuana to the workplace? Yes, sir. Well, it's a constitutional right. Business says no, they could get sued. So this is, the way this is done, even apart from the cartel, even apart from no home growing, even apart from no public, from allowing public use and not restricting that, and even the civil liability, the immunity that the companies are getting, just the way they fashion this for personal use, this is going to open up huge, huge cans of worms in all aspects of our society. So please go into this eyes wide open. Look, I'm confident. I mean, when you have 150 million total, so one company did 141.9. I guess they did raise a little bit more money, so they've had a total of 149.7. Most of that obviously from the one company. But when you have that much money behind something, commercials, text messages, all these different things, you know, that's like, it can be numbing and overwhelming. But whatever they're texting you, whatever they're putting on TV, they're not addressing what's actually in this amendment, I think, in a way that would answer your concerns. So if you have any doubt, you just vote no. I honestly think once people read it, most people are just going to say it's a bad idea. And I think that then we'll just move on. But if you have any doubt, this is the Constitution. You err on the side of caution. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. I know we've got people can vote today and more early voting, and then the election on Tuesday. So we're looking forward to that, and hopefully everything will work out great for the state of Florida. God bless everybody.